Hi everyone, this is Piyush Ranjan. I'm the founder and chief consultant of Management Masters. We are a boutique admissions consulting firm for the top MBA and MIM programs in the world. Now, in our video interview series, we have a very special guest today as well. And we have with us Nakul Arora, who is currently pursuing his MBA from the Dartmouth Tuck School of Business. So without further ado, let's start with Nakul. Nakul, why don't you give us a brief introduction about yourself, what you have done, and how your career has progressed till date?
Sure, Piyush. I did my undergrad from IIT BHU the same year as Piyush. That's how I know Piyush. That was way back in 2011. Post that, I went into non-profit education sector by joining Teach for India. Teach for India was relatively new at that point, and we were the first batch in Delhi. In fact, I loved teaching and decided to stay in that sector post Teach for India. I worked for around a year with Kunj and then for around 2 years with Teach for Bangladesh in different managerial capacities. Post that, I came back to my hometown in India and decided to set up a hotel for my family. We had a very old property that was lying idle, which I converted into a hotel. Uh, and while I was growing that business from it being a small idea to something that was live and making money, that is when it hit me that I actually enjoy running a business, that I enjoy growing an idea from just a concept to a final product that a consumer likes or that a consumer would use. Uh, I also identified a lot of gaps that I had in my business skills, and I thought a business school degree would be a very good way for me to fill that gap up.
That's a very interesting career journey that you talk about. So you if I understand correctly, you started with the social sector. You started with really getting into the depths of providing education, quality education, and then you moved to manage your family businesses. So how was this transition for you? Like, what were the biggest challenges, or what were the gaps that you mentioned in your business skills? What did you identify?
I mean, like I was very set on being in the nonprofit education sector for life. And when I moved back to India, I thought that was what I would pursue for the remainder of my life. However, the reality of the nonprofit sector in India is that it's the pay gets saturated after a point, and you have to, uh, if you're looking at in terms of finances, you need to think. Um, Beyond the salary unless you're able to limit your expenses. So for me, moving into starting a hotel was a way for me to secure my finances as well as my family's finances. The challenge was that the hotel was non-existent before I started it. Like, it was a very old property uh, in a very dilapidated condition. So I had to start from scratch, get the renovations done, understand the business, uh, take up a loan for managing all of the expenses. Um, and the challenges were very similar to what come with establishing a business. Hospitality is very
Yes.
customer driven. It's a very saturated market, even in a small tier two town like my hometown. It was a
Yeah.
very saturated market. So understanding what was it that the competitors were doing, what is the value add or the differentiating factor that I can offer. There was a big underlying trend happening at that time that the hospitality market was shifting online with Go Ibibo, Make My Trip, Booking.com, and Oyo, uh, vying for the
Yeah.
online booking market. So it was a mix of understanding the larger trends in the industry, understanding what the competitors were doing, and then just being very persistent with our service. That kind of helped us establish ourselves as a good brand, and we were able to significantly grow the business. Like I grew my business by four times within a span of 1.5 years.
That's great. That sounds absolutely amazing. But then the question that I have next is sort of like, why did you feel the need for an MBA? Because uh, to be honest, you don't come from a very average MBA profile. When you applied for your MBA, you already had almost, or rather, when you joined your MBA class, you already have like 8 years of experience. Whereas if you see the average profile experience at Tuck or at the top USB schools, they lie more around the 5 years band.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
why did you realize that, MBA would be the way to go forward, and why not continue just maybe further expanding your hotel?
So the hotel was always set up as a retirement plan for my parents. So yeah, I definitely planned for expanding it, but expanding the hotel involves a very different set of skills. The hospitality business is very capital intensive, and once you start expanding it, there's a lot of upfront capital investment that's required, and I wasn't comfortable making that, given that my basic premise in setting up the first hotel was my family's financial security. And I somewhere this like yes, the average experience of people in a top business school MBA program is 5 years. However, I think there are two categories of people who come for an MBA. One, who have had like 7 to 9 years of work ex and are seeking a career shift or like a shift in their career trajectory. So for them, MBA is a very good way of transitioning into a new career, or potentially exploring corporate life.
Mm-hmm.
The other is people with 4 to 6 years of work ex. These are people who went into corporate, had a very straight path, either went into consulting, banking, tech, had a very straight path right out of college. And then the MBA is a good step for them to make a jump in their career.
Yeah.
So the MBA serves different purposes for people with different needs. For someone like me, it's a very good way to transition into a different career trajectory.
All right, sounds absolutely amazing and very interesting insights that we're getting. Like for 4 to 6 years of experience, people with such an experience, it's the outcome for the MBA, or the outcome that they are looking from an MBA degree is very different compared to what people with a little bit higher experience what they would be looking at. That's a very interesting point that you bring. So the next question that I have is, obviously, again, going back to your experience with almost 7 years of experience that you applied to the MBA, when you started this preparation journey for your MBA, like, did you face any issues, or what were the biggest issues and challenges that you faced?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so one was just kind of overcoming my own inertia. Like, I was running a business since 3 years. When you're running a business, you're used to being in charge. Uh, so it was just weird, knowing that you had to, like, write essays and write lengthy answers, give the exam again to apply to places. So that was just the initial inertia. The second was, there is definitely a mind block in terms of, like, uh, just being concerned if my profile is good enough. Before I came to business school, I used to think that people who came to a top business school were unique in any way or different. But these are like normal people with very normal, very, I mean, they are all achievers in their careers, but it doesn't take something extraordinary or special to get into a top school. It just takes a lot of, like, you have to be very persistent with the approach. You have to make sure that you're meeting all the basic criteria, and then leave the rest to luck or destiny. So just overcoming that initial mental inertia was critical. And then after that, preparing for GMAT, identifying the other steps, getting the people who would refer me in order,
Yeah.
and lastly, thinking about my story, making sure that I was articulating it in the best possible way. These were all the steps that had to be done, and the good thing was I went about it in a very patient, slow, one step at a time way, instead of trying to do it all together and getting overwhelmed.
Absolutely. So you touch upon some very, very important stuff. GMAT, I think everybody talks about how should you prepare for GMAT, or what should you do and when should you start doing it. But I would rather skip that question, because it's like there's too many answers available for that, right? I'd go for something more interesting, which you mentioned regarding the recommendations, because yours is not a traditional profile, or rather a traditional career path that most people would have. And there are a lot of candidates with similar trajectory to yours who have maybe gone back to their family businesses or done something on their own, which is not exactly called a startup scenario, or where they are not really working with a lot of stakeholders higher above them, right? So how did you approach your recommenders, and who did you approach it for? How did you try to identify those people?
I mean, so I had plenty of people. Like, I had been managed by around four people in my career till to that point, um, and I had good relations with three of them, and all three of them were ready to refer me. Um, However, I wanted somebody who was like a stakeholder in in my hotel as well. So I approached somebody that I had started a learning circle, learning center in my hotel as well, and I had devised a curriculum with a friend who has a chain of schools in Delhi. So I approached him because he and I had worked together on coming up with that learning center. So he had seen me grow the hotel business and was invested in a part of the hotel as well. So I thought he would be a very good person to talk about my journey as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
The other person I approached was one of my managers at Teacher Bangladesh.
All right.
I think like it's just important to be able to know and identify people who uh, have been like a mentor or who champion you, who believe in you, and are invested in your growth. Because being a a person writing a reference is hard, especially for a school like Tuck, which doesn't follow the GMAT format for
Yeah.
common recommendations. You have to have somebody who is invested in your success for them to take that extra step into giving you a good reference.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a very, very important step that you covered. So thank you for that. Uh, Talking about Tuck, before we come to Tuck, maybe just a quick overview of which schools did you apply to, and you also received a scholarship from Tuck. So what results did you get? Just to sort of get our viewers further interested into this. So which schools did you apply to, and what were your results as such?
So yeah, I applied to I think five or six schools.
Mhm.
Um, it's funny, when I was applying, I was so invested into it, and now I can't even recall. Yeah, it's been a year and a half. But I got an acceptance from Ross, Michigan Ross, then uh, University of Southern California,
Marshall.
Marshall,
Yeah.
uh, and Tuck. These were the three acceptances. The places that I got dinged from was Kellogg, MIT Sloan,
Yeah.
and Stanford.
All right. All right. And you also received a merit scholarship from Tuck. So could you tell us a bit more about how easy it is or how difficult it is for international students, especially from countries like India, where the pay is not that high compared to what other countries would have? So how is it to manage your finances? What are the best possible ways that you could go about managing your finances, apart from the scholarships as well?
Yeah, so I mean, MBA is a very significant investment, and it should be something that should be very carefully thought about because coming from India, your currency is anyways losing 1/70th of its value, and uh, like business school is expensive. Just if you think of the fees and then living cost as well. And then most of your friends who are coming, especially from the US or other places, they've all been earning in dollars. And
Yeah.
if they're coming from consulting or banking, some of these people have made good money, in terms of their salaries prior to B school. And then comes somebody like me who has worked in social sector for 4 years. So, when I go for dinners with some of my friends and I'm like, there are times when I'm like, oh, and for them, that's a very normal meal. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
it's not a
Absolutely.
normal, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to have a plan. Like I have a budget that I follow strictly, and I budgeted things for trips as well because business school involves taking a lot of trips with your classmates. Some of them are spontaneous. Like if you're in a place like Tuck, Hanover has a beautiful the Upper Valley area is very beautiful. There are a lot of hikes. So every weekend we're going for hikes, or we're going to like we take up an Airbnb at a nearby location. So you just have to make sure that you have a budget and you have a plan and you know how much you're spending and what's the upper limit to which you can go.
Yeah.
The way to kind of balance it out, the way I did it was I put in some percentage as my personal savings. The other percentage was Tuck scholarship. Then Tuck also has a feature of giving international students interest, like a very low interest loan.
Okay.
But that's it's not a large amount, but it's still decent.
Yeah.
Um, and then the rest, you have to take up a loan, or unless your employer is sponsoring, or
Yeah.
but you get
Absolutely.
a loan uh, through like Tuck helps facilitate that process. So getting the loan is not difficult, but it should be just be like it's very important because you get access to all these funds through the loan. So it's super important that you know what your budget is, because it's very easy to go overboard with the budget and end up
Absolutely.
spending more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now that we're done with the finances and the recommendations, let's come to a bit more traditional talk about the MBA. And when you hear about MBA applications, the first thing that pops up in the mind is essays. And Tuck has like quite a few essays, 3 essays, and very peculiar essays because they're not very similar to what other schools would have, and they're not very standard essays that you would find everywhere. So instead, we won't go through each of the essays, but rather, could you tell us about how did you approach tackling your essays? Like, what was the first thing that you would do for each of the essays?
Sure. So I think like I really loved Tuck's essays. I think that's that's one of the things that makes Tuck special. Tuck is really focused on getting the right kind of people who are nice, uh, and friendly into the campus, because it's such a small school.
Yeah,
Our class is one of the smallest in sizes, and Hanover is such a small community that it's very important that uh, most people who come up here believe in community.
yeah,
In terms of talking specifically about the essays, I think the way I used to do it was initially, like, the first step is obviously, you thinking about your story. It's very important to know why you want to do the MBA. Like, how would the MBA help you get from point A to point B? All the websites tell you that. If you go to GMAT Club, everybody tells you that. But no,
yeah,
I mean, it's just tough to kind of keep this in the center when you're applying, because given how big the investment and MBA is in terms of money, as well as you taking 2 years out of your career, so the opportunity cost of that, if you don't know how the MBA will help you get to your goals, you're gonna get frustrated,
yep,
and it will be
exactly.
tough converting or finding the right job for you. An MBA is a very good way to reset your career, or like totally transition to a new path. I've had friends who have come from oil and gas and gone into banking. Um, so it's just a very amazing way to reset your career, after 7 to 8 years. So you just be clear on what is it that you're trying to get out of the MBA. Once that initial storyline is there in your head, and for every essay, I would like, first sit and prepare a very rough draft, which was just me throwing all the ideas at one place. Then I would leave it, come back to it the next day, then write it down like a essay. So from ideation to writing it down like an essay.
Yeah,
And then I had an advisor that was helping me.
yeah,
So I would like sit and brainstorm with her on how to make sure, like, how to tighten the essay and how to like polish it. So the third stage was polishing it and making sure that, I was uh, presenting my ideas in the most articulate way possible.
absolutely. And that's probably one of the most efficient ways to do it. Like I've some of the candidates that I'm working with, and in the past and currently as well, a lot of them get stuck when it comes to writing the essays. They know their stories, they know everything that they want to talk about, but they get totally stuck when when they start working on it. And what you mentioned is absolutely critical. Just instead of waiting to get that first perfect sentence, which you would start your essay with,
Yeah.
just write down the points. Just pick up the pen and write down stuff. So that's something very interesting that you said. Very, very useful and very pragmatic. when it comes to working on the essays. Uh, Now let's come to a part which initially wasn't planned when we plan our video interviews, but it's absolutely critically relevant for today's times, and that would be Corona and how exactly the MBA programs are dealing with. And Nakul, you have been at the center of that, right? So you went to US, you did the first half of your first year at Tuck in a proper physical setting, and then suddenly from March onwards everything was disrupted and everything suddenly moved online, and Corona came and everything is in hammer. So how have the MBA programs, or especially at the Tuck MBA program, how has Tuck responded to that, and what has your experience been so far?
Yeah, I mean, Corona has been unfortunate, obviously, for everyone, and it has impacted. Uh, I mean, it has impacted all forms of college, but MBA is so much about the people. It's so much about the networking element. Uh, like MBA is not that we're not specializing in a particular major here. We're not coming out as experts in finance or data analysts, etc. MBA is all about forming those connections, and the biggest network that you have 10 years from now is your classmate. These are all people who would be going on into different fields, and then hopefully rising up, and they are your biggest network. So that it was very tough to accept the online when the classes shifted online. It was just a very weird transition because you were not seeing your classmates anymore. You were not running into them in the corridor, and especially at a place like TAC, which is such a close knit community. Like, I know all my classmates. I know all my 270 classmates, which is not even which might not even be possible at a big school.
Yeah.
So it was a tough transition. It was something that we all struggled with. However, I was amazed with the speed at which Tuck was able to get its professors to, transition to using Zoom, uh, and we were running classes using breakout rooms uh, to simulate the normal discussion as much as possible. It was just amazing. Professors were very open with new technology. They were openly asking us for help. We could see that they were struggling, even for professors, instead of speaking to an interactive class of MBA students, you're now speaking to a camera. And you don't know how people are reacting, because you have to simultaneously follow 2, 3 screens,
Yeah.
So, but it was I think that where I was amazed at the speed at which Tuck was able to transition. And I would say in terms of there was definitely a drop in learning levels um, from offline to online because of how rich the discussion is in offline environments. But in no way did we feel that we were getting a very rough end of the deal when things shifted online because of how efficient Tuck was in doing that.
Right. And so how do you expect the next session to go on? Like, are you pretty positive about it? Do you still have doubts about it? Or is it going to be a hybrid model at Tuck? What exactly is it going to be?
So Tuck has said that it's going to be a hybrid model. There would be some classes that will be in person and for specific set of people. So I think on rotation basis, people would be able to come to class. Um, and they have also invested in new technologies to ensure that study groups are able to meet as much as possible physically. Luckily, the New Hampshire area or the Upper Valley area where Tuck is still doesn't have that many COVID cases yet. So hopefully, things should be fine. Um, but I mean, obviously, we are all we're all confused as to how would this progress and how long is this going to last. There's definitely this element of the MBA is also known for its parties as well as its travels. The MBA is not just about job search, networking. It's also about making lifelong friendships. So we are all definitely missing out those smaller elements.
All right, sounds good. But again, I think for that we can only hope for the best, and I
Yeah.
definitely wish you the best for that. So just going forward a bit, how do you see yourself further working at Tuck? You're doing an internship currently, so what your advice would be for people, who are aspirants for Tuck? Tuck is one of the one of the best schools in the US. So what would your advice be in terms of how should people prepare, and what should they be doing with their time at this point of time
To get into talk?
to get into Tuck or any top USB school?
Sure. I think just like, what I mentioned earlier, making sure that one, why you're choosing to do this. The MBA should not come out of desperation. It should not come out of like, these crazy ideas that an MBA would change your life. It's still a lot of hard work getting into a good job, post getting into a good program, because you're competing with your classmates who uh, have all come from great backgrounds.
Yep.
So you need to know why, what are you trying to get out of this experience, and why is it the right step for you at this stage. So how does it get you from point A to point B in your career? Um, Once you have a little bit idea, like you don't need extreme clarity on that. Obviously, you can come to the MBA and explore, but you just having that initial clarity helps. And when you come to the MBA, I think in terms of like preparing for the MBA, it's very important to be very persistent and have a plan. It's a marathon. Like there's no way you can fast track that process. It's a very
Absolutely.
it's a
Absolutely.
very slow process. You have to give the GMAT, and that takes around 2 to 3 months, depending on how much time you have, and then you have to like write all those long essays, uh, work crazy on endless drafts, and finally submit it, then wait for the interview call, then get the interview done.
And
It's a
then
long
wait for the
process,
results.
and
And
then
then
wait
wait
for
for the
the results.
results. It never ends. Like
And
something. Yeah. Sorry.
no, it's okay. It doesn't even end after the results, by the way.
It doesn't. It doesn't, because people would have started with their GMAT preparation somewhere in January or February, and then it goes on until May or June, depending on what sort of scores they get and if they're satisfied with that. And then they start working on their essays, they start working on their applications, and then the final results actually come. If they apply in round one, then the final results come in December. So it's a full year that it might take some people. So
Yeah,
absolutely, couldn't agree
yeah,
more with that fact. With what you mentioned, it's a marathon.
yeah. It is definitely a marathon. I mean, in fact, like some of my friends here at Tuck, I have realized that they have been thinking about the MBA from uh, early on in their career. Like I was different, I never had MBA. MBA was never in my plans. But looking back, people knew right after their graduation, and they built their career up in a way that the MBA fits in to the
Yeah.
plans, which is amazing, to have that kind of clarity. And that's good if you have it. But then there are also like, tons of people like me, who for whom MBA uh, was a realization at a later stage of their career, and that's also totally fine. But once you get in, it's very important to not get drawn into the uh, into the crowd. At Tuck, there's a big consulting crowd. Tuck is a very renowned consulting school. So,
Exactly.
and uh, like there, and I mean, there different schools are known for different things. It's just important to know that um, these 2 years are for you to develop yourself as a individual, as a leader, and you're paying a lot of money, and you get access to crazy resources. Like the amount of resources that we have access to at Tuck is insane. We have access. Uh, they go out of the way to make sure that you have everything that you need, and it's up to us to be able to utilize that. And the best way to utilize it is to kind of take a step back, reflect, know how your career goals are changing, try flirt with different career streams, talk to your classmates who have come from them, reach out to the alumni network, understand their path, look at their LinkedIn profiles and see how how has somebody entered VC, or how has somebody entered PE, and if that is something that makes sense to you. And like these 2 years, you can actually kind of narrow down or figure out what makes the most sense for you in your career, and then work really well to develop the skills that set you up for success in that career stream.
Absolutely. I think I could create a separate video out of this and call it Golden Words by Nakul Arora, and that would be absolutely perfectly fit there. I think I'm mostly done with my questions. The only thing that I can do now is basically to wish you the best for the coming months, for your rest of the MBA program, for your internship, and for your future job search. And thank you so much, Nakul, for joining us.